Yeah, thank you very much, Ting, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today at Stabi and to the people of Cross Asia. I felt compelled to do this presentation already because I've been using Cross Asia so much that I kind of have to give something back, yeah, for all the times I've been profiting from you. So I felt really happy that you invited me. I chose the Sarye from the collection of the State Library. When I was asked to choose a Korean book from the collection of the State Library, I looked through the inventory and I came upon the Sarye and thought like, this might be of interest to me because I had some run-ins with the book before. But I maybe have to say beforehand, as you maybe heard out of Jing's introduction, that I'm not an expert on ritual culture in the Chosŏn dynasty. I'm more concerned, or my research is more focused on educational processes. But of course, rituals and the performance of the correct performance of rituals was always a big part of the educational process in pre-modern Korea. So I've heard about the Sarye before, and I saw some other ritual books. So I finally chose this one. Usually ritual texts that I'm familiar with are always rather boring, to be say, or dull is maybe the better word. Yeah, they're about like stand up, bow, sit down, go to the front, read a book, sit down again, bow, move to the back. With the Sarye it's a little bit different because it is actually a handbook that very exhaustively describes the whole process of the ritual in great detail, from the meaning of the ritual up to the actual minute details of the performance, introducing the ritual implements that you have to use, and how to write the letter and the invitation to take part in the ritual. So it's also, I think, an interesting or very interesting representation of the ritual culture and how systematized and in some sense even very bureaucratic it became in the late Chosŏn dynasty. Of course, the question of how to correctly perform rituals was of great great importance. As this was seen as a practical expression that like the knowledge of Confucian ideals became internalized in the person. So today, I'm going to speak about 3 points. I want to give a little bit of background, talking about ritual context. It's kind of an arbitrary division I made here between different rituals, but by this I can maybe show a little bit of the different ritual culture that existed in the Chosŏn dynasty, and also by showing these 3 different types: school rituals, royal rituals, and family rituals. I'm going to try to show you that the problem of how to correctly perform a ritual was actually always a controversial question and always like very much discussed. Yeah, what is the right way of doing it? Is it the way it was described in the book, or actually the customs of the people are more important? What to follow? What books to follow? What commentaries to follow? And then we will see how the Sarye, the book I chose, deals with this. And then in between, I will shortly talk about the person that edited this book or put it together, Yi Chae, and we'll introduce a little bit of his background and the publication history of the book before I then talk about the book itself, and it will introduce you a little bit to its structure and some of its content. So coming to school rituals first, these were known as Sokchon or Sokche, and were performed for Confucius in the schools. Originally, the idea came from a ritual practice of holding a ritual when a new school was established, and then offerings were given to the great teacher Confucius, of course, and some of his disciples, which became then practice that like twice a year in spring and autumn, such rites were held. Different foods were offered to the great Confucian scholars. Alcohol was offered, and for Confucius and his disciples. These rites were held in Korea mainly in the Songyungwan during the Chosŏn dynasty, which is the national academy, so the main school in the capital. Because part of this Songyungwan National Academy was the Confucius Shrine, the main Confucius Shrine, where Confucius and many of his disciples were venerated, and of course this shows, of course, the close connection between educational processes and rituals in this case. What is important in the Korean case also to say that not only Confucius and some his immediate disciples and some great Confucians from the past, as well as some Chinese scholars from the Sung dynasty, were worshipped, but also over time of the Joseon dynasty, some 18 Korean scholars were added to this Confucian shrine. Similar rites were held on a lower level in the local schools. So the Songyung one was in the capital, while we have these Yanggyo or local schools in the countryside. And these were often, of course, much smaller than the Songyung one, but modeled after the same design. So you had like a teaching hall, you had a shrine hall, where, of course, educational processes and then also rituals to Confucius were held. But of course, because these schools were smaller, so the extent and the performance of the rites was often also a little bit toned down. It wasn't like all the Chinese scholars were venerated in there, but often just like Confucius and the immediate Confucian scholars of the past. And then, which marks kind of a special case, we have the Confucian academies that appear in Korea in the middle of the 16th century. And what makes them special is that they venerate not Confucius, and some of them do, but many of these academies are actually hold rituals for Korean scholars, like only for Korean scholars. Which is, of course, they do this by, of course, relying on some Chinese precedents, saying, yeah, in China there's also academies that focus not so much on the Confucian pantheon, but like venerate local scholars. And so the Koreans start doing this too for Korean scholars that lived in these areas. Here's a picture of this Sokchon rites in the Songyungwan, I assume. At this point, this is a picture from colonial times. So at that point, the Songyungwan was known as Gyeonghakgon. And you can see here the three ritual officers standing that would present the 3 cups of alcohol or 3 rounds of alcohol to the main objects of veneration, which is Confucius and his immediate disciples. Yeah. And then you see maybe there, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe the person sitting on the ground is the announcer who leads through the whole ritual. As mentioned, the Confucian academies are somewhat of a special case because they venerated in their shrines not Confucius, but Korean scholars. So here we have a picture from Oksan Academy, which is located in the southeast of the Korean peninsula. And the object of veneration is here the scholar Yeonjok, who lived in this area where the academy was later founded, at this area of residence after his death, of course, and then he was venerated by the scholars there who studied his teachings as well, so kind of formed in connection with him particularly. You see in the middle of the picture is his spirit tablet that bears his name, so it's the representation of the person that here is venerated in this ritual. And the offerings are basically given to him here. What is interesting about these academy rituals, of course, first of all, is that they kind of diverge already from the ritual practice in school by mostly being focused on Korean scholars. But then also we find that they often include, and this is the case in Chosån here, because it was close to the seaside, it included seafood, dried seafood in this ritual, which was not common practice in other schools or in the educational and the school rituals held in the Songyungwan, for example. A little side note at this point, in the research for this talk, I found that in 2020, so 3 years ago, the former president, Lee Byung of the Academy of Korean Studies, became the first woman to actually be the main offerer in one of these rituals. So there is some change. So many of these rituals are still held. Also the rituals at Songyungwan to Confucius are still held. You can actually look it up on YouTube. Yeah? You can follow live these rituals and watch them. It's very interesting if you have an interest in these matters. Yeah? The whole process, they show really everything, how the alcohol is prepared and then given out to the ritual officers, how they're presented, the reading out. And then there's, of course, in these big rituals for Confucius, there's also dancing involved and music. That is also very famous. One point that stands out here, and I'm sorry for the wall of text, but I will summarize it a little bit. One point that stands out here is the difference between, so to say, these official school rites and then with the academies coming in, kind of falling in between or out of the officially established ritual protocol. So because it was not really defined what kind of rituals were supposed to be held, how they were supposed to be held, what kind of offerings were to give in these rituals of the academies, they often made their own ritual customs up. And then so they involved different offerings to the scholars. And of course, these sometimes were very valuable things, like sacrificial offerings of animals that were sacrificed, pigs, beef, deer that was used. And then, of course, these offerings were not just thrown away, but were often consumed by the members of the academy, or were always consumed by the members of the academy. But then you also, in this one, the scholar Pak To-sang, he actually complains about that the academies, their rituals are actually more lavish than the rituals held in the main Confucian academies. So, of course, we here have a problem of hierarchy, that the rituals held for Confucian scholars in Korea are actually more kind of higher than the rituals held for Confucius in the main national academy. So he complains here. And this is, of course, part of the history also of Confucian academies in Korea, that many of them became very important centers economically and used their position as like a center of the local elites to also kind of blackmail the local population and giving them economic benefits, food stuff, their silks, that of course made them, many of these academies very places to collect wealth. Sometimes too. So there is kind of a ritual controversy or kind of conflict that exists upon these rites, because the definition of what actually these academies, what kind of rites they were supposed to hold, was not always clear, or sometimes just even broken, even if it was clear. Then rituals, the next point I'm going to talk about is the royal rituals, which are already a little bit closer to the main point, so the rituals that are held in a family, but of course, so they resemble them in a close way. But of course, the responsibilities held by a ruler, the crown prince, the queen, were a little bit wider, I would say, or different from what a normal elite family member was holding as responsibilities of performing rituals. So we have these auspicious rites, Sarye, which include the ancestor worship. So if you come to Seoul, there's the big royal shrine where the king was always supposed to go and perform rituals to his family members, to his deceased family members. And therefore, of course, thereby, of course, also confirming his position in the line of kings and in the royal line, but also to announce like the birth of a new family member. So this kind of resembles the practice that was done in the family, but also these auspicious rites include like rituals held for good harvest in the country, for the sowing of grain. So there's a kind of a customary sowing of the first grain by the king in order to receive good harvest. Then, of course, we have festive rites, which are wedding rites. This also resembles the rites kind of held in the family, but also a little bit beyond that. For example, the installment of a new crown prince was an important part. It was considered a festive event, as well as the palace examinations. You know, maybe that one part of the Chosŏn state were the civil service examinations that the elites had to take in order to get to high positions in the government. And the last stage of these examinations were actually held in front of the king. So the king was present there. So, and of course, this was like also a ritual part of his responsibilities. Then we have the guest rites, which includes, of course, many diplomatic matters, so foreign dignitaries coming to the Chosŏn court, but particularly, of course, the envoys from China, so from the Ming dynasty or later the Qing dynasty, coming to China, coming to Korea, and then being entertained there. And of course, there was ritual protocol involved in all of this too. For military rites, these are, for example, of course, closely related to military matters, but also included, for example, rituals where the king was doing archery, so shooting a bow. Because of this, because of course, archery is also part of the 6 arts of Confucianism. So the king also was supposed to show his adherence to these ideals by performing archery rituals. And then one of the most important things that also again is mirrored in the family rituals is funeral rites that involve or that are closely related also to succession matters. Yeah, so the main person performing, of course, the funeral rites for a deceased king was the crown prince, and then thereby the next king. And you see, there's a lot of ritual literature that was produced during the Chosŏn dynasty, trying to define how these rites were supposed to be held, what was special, or changes maybe as well over time, that also, in a sense, represent certain conflicts that were part of these discussions. Here you have some of these descriptions. This is particular the coming of age rite, so the capping rite for the later King Sukjong. And you can see maybe it's a little bit small, but if you look really closely, maybe you can see always, here is the the crown prince's position, where he bows to some of the officials receiving his cap, the members of the Shigangwon, so the crown prince, the bureau of the crown prince in charge of raising and educating the crown prince, stand outside. And then here we have actually a picture how the capping of the crown prince is reported to the king. So Sukjeong, the later king Sukjeong here received his capping, so his introduction into adolescence, at the age of 9. Usual, as we will see later, was actually, it was supposed to be at the age of between 15 and 20, but because capping was also often, or these coming of age rites were also often connected to being engaged and to marriage, he received probably these his capping much earlier because he already married a year later, and then took the throne when he was 13 years old. Here is a description or a depiction of his marriage to his second wife. The first wife died rather quickly, so he married Queen Inyeon, who of course has a famous history of her own, and is described here. You see the royal procession involved in this wedding. Wedding rites especially, and I will not go into much detail into this. Martina Deuchler has written much about this. We're always, in Korea, we're always very much, it was always a big discussion what to follow. So there were rites that were already used in Korea for a long time. And then there were also, of course, this all ritual literature about Confucian rites that came in from China. So there was always a discussion what was actually what to follow. Then often these books contradicted each other. So it was always kind of a big question and discussion, often also between the bureaucratic elites about what was the correct rite to follow in these wedding rites. Similarly, of course, with funerals. Here's, of course, the most famous, the ritual controversy that erupted after the death of the king Hyojong in the 17th century. And the question was if the queen, who was his stepmother, in what way she was, in what way she was supposed to mourn his death. So the question was he to be mourned as a first son, as a second son, or as a king, which all involve different length of the mourning. And these discussions at court were related to the question, and Jayon Kim Habush has written about this quite interestingly, so I won't go into much detail here either, but also were related to the question if the king was of a completely different category, so he fell into his own category for rituals. So even though King Yojong was a second son, because his older brother had died and he had replaced him as the crown prince, if he was to be mourned as a king, so with full mourning, or if he was supposed to be a second son, which would make the ritual about him more how a Confucian family, so an elite family would mourn a second son. So this is a question about the position of the king within, this is a discussion about the position of the king within the country that is played out over these rituals here. So you can see there is a lot of questions also related to these discussions about rituals are often also related to hierarchical social questions, and they are played out of this. What is to mention here that, like, in this discussion over this particular matter, were involved two famous scholars. One is Song Xiol, and one is Song Jung-gil, who I will talk about a little bit later, a little bit. So finally come to the main point, maybe. The family rites We have the 4 standard rites or rituals, which I kind of already introduced, which was the capping, so adolescence, coming of age rite, both for boys and girls. Then we had wedding rites, of course, which of course were meant to continue the family line, funeral rites, which were very much involved, as I kind of already kind of implied that what was involved in these was the continuing of the family line. So who became after the main son or the main focal point of the family died, who would be the next in line to replace him and be the head of the family. And then, of course, ancestor worship, which was also related. So the head of the family then, which was usually supposed to be the oldest son of the family, was in charge of performing these rites, these ancestor worship in the shrine of the family. Yeah, so we see so different positions, and there's the social hierarchy that plays out through these rituals. The main source for Korean scholars in the Chosŏn dynasty, of course, for all these rituals, was a book called the Jali, which is also often translated as a Master Jew's family rites or domestic rites. You often find that these, which was in a sense, kind of the digest, of other ritual books, and these ritual books, because the original classical ritual books were often confusing or contradictory in many points, and also there were questions about the transference of the knowledge in these books, because it was often said that there was like a famous or like a complete book on ritual, but that like many books or the original ritual books were lost to the burning of the books during the Qin dynasty. So these books were somewhat jumbled, and it was difficult to actually find like the correct forms for the rituals. So and they were also difficult to understand and to apply. So that Zhu Xi, so the Confucian scholar, the Chinese Confucian scholar who lived in the Song dynasty in the 12th century, wrote this Jali, domestic sources, and kind of re-established what these rites were and how they were to be performed. So this book became the most important book for the Confucian scholars of the Chosŏn dynasty as well. Yeah, talking about the origin of the Jali itself, there is some influence from earlier books, especially Sima Guang's Shui, and also some ritual deliberations by the scholar Cheng, which is also an important scholar of the Song dynasty, and they played all, and Zhu Xi kind of included them all in his book. And the idea behind the Jali was, of course, to make ritual performance of these 4 main rituals easily accessible. So it was, the Jali was also designed in a way to be a handbook, to be easily used in order to perform these rituals. What important points were included in these books is especially the focus of the scholar Cheng, and then also kind of, I already kind of talked about this a little bit, that we have a strong focus on the first son as the ritual performer. So the descent line is always focused on the first son, and younger sons are there to assist. So in the ritual, as observers and assist maybe in the performance of the ritual, but the ritual line is continued through always the first son, which is an important point, especially when this book came to Korea and then informed somewhat there, the usage and changes in society as well. And you can see the setup of the book is you have some general discussions, and then you have each these 4 rituals. The book came to Korea, or it is said that the book came to Korea in 1307, so already before the Chosŏn dynasty was founded, and then was studied there as well. And then the first scholars that were really involved with it were of the late Koryo dynasty, or the late Koryo kingdom, the famous Neo-Confucian scholars of that time, Chongmungju, who already started to put some of these ideas that are presented in the Jali into practice. So they started this free mourning for parents, which is the longest, of course, mourning you would do for your immediate parents. And they started to build shrines, which I said was already Korean practice before, but had been lost. So this was kind of just a return also to practices that they thought were already had been common in Korea. And then an important point is, of course, also the inclusion of the Jali in the civil service examinations. And as I already kind of said, and this is again, I have to say here, the main, this is all very much, very well explained in the book of Martina Deuchler, or in both books, The Confucian Transformation of Korea and Under the Ancestors' Eyes, is how these Chinese ritual books in particular, but of course there's other influences as well, but how they then, over a longer time period, so this is not immediately, of course, but in a longer time period, kind of reformed Korean society around this idea of the first son, patrilineal, so it stays only on the male side of the family, and then and this became kind of the focus, at least of the elites, of the Confucian elites in Korea. And so the Jali played a very important role in this process. And you see this also in comments that Korean scholars make about the Jali, that it is in the study process, you have to first study the elementary learning, which is also a book that is very much influenced by ritual writing or older ritual books, and kind of teaches younger kids on how to behave. What is the right behavior if you meet an older person? How do you talk to people? How to eat properly? It goes really into these details. And the Jali, of course, also builds the basic foundation of these rituals that students were already supposed to know before they continued with their education in school. But as I indicated, there was always discussion about how to properly put these rituals into use. The one problem was, of course, there was a difference, not only in space, but also in time, between the writing of the Jali and the time when the Korean Confucian scholars tried to put it into use. So there were lots of things that didn't make sense, or that weren't able to put into practice. So a lot of discussions came around, or interpretations, annotations, commentaries on the Jali were produced, where there were often counter arguments. One would suggest, okay, this is how you what is meant at this point here, or this is how you actually put this into practice. And then another scholar would produce another book saying, no, it's actually, this is how you do it, and this is the way it should be, actually, the ritual should be performed. So you have, as you can see here, quite a big, or quite many books that are written on ritual performance, or especially as a commentary to the Jali, trying to put it into perspective. And this is the way we also have to see the Sarye Pyolam, which was put together by this scholar named Toam Yi Chae, who himself came from a rather influential family. So his aunt was the aforementioned Queen Inyeon, His grandfather was also an important person. He succeeded pretty early in the civil service examinations and then held very important posts and was always considered to be also a ritual expert. Yeah? So he was often asked for the king to deliberate on why certain rituals were performed in that way. But he was also of the part of the factional infighting or the factional fighting struggles that defined much of the 17th and 18th century during the Chosŏn dynasty. So especially during the changes between King Sukjong, King Gyeongjong, and King Yeongjo, he was involved or became involved in these struggles and retired before then returning and then finally retiring and concentrating on teaching when he also started to collect writings or to start his collection that would later be the Sarye that we have today. So we see again his idea on how these ritual books or what a ritual book should include. So he was also of the opinion that there was originally in ancient times and antiquity, there was one perfect book on ritual. But this book was burnt or became lost, and then we had these 3 different books that, of course, they were all like put together also wrongly, and there were many problems with that. So even though now we had the Jali, so the book by Juxi, there was a question often how to actually define or how to really put these rituals into practice. So how to do this. And his idea was, okay, you have to study the ritual books and really find out and compare these different ritual books and really find out what is the correct way of performing that ritual. Of course, he also came from a teaching line. He was especially as part of the Noron faction, or patriarch faction, as is often called, stood in the line of the scholar Sung Hyeol. And one big influence on his writing or his ritual understanding was a book called the Sarye so not the Sarye Pyolam, sorry, that's the book I'm talking about, the Sangne Pyo, yeah, so the essential points of the funeral rites, which was a book that focused especially on funeral rites and ancestor worship. The book wasn't finished after his death. And then it was put together by some of his disciples over a long period of time. So it took nearly 100 years, which was also that his disciples couldn't often, or his even his family members were involved, also couldn't often decide if his personal opinion on certain matters was correct or was incorrect. So they also had many discussions about his ideas included in the book. But then finally, in 1844, the book was produced, and it is the version that is most common today. But we also find many later printed versions of the book, which also then became augmented again. So there was like a newer version produced at a later time and then also put into print. So I don't know how I am with time. I hope I'm okay. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, so coming to the main part, actually, of what I wanted to introduce to you today is the book itself. I hope I can, like, all the points I made before, I can show you how these influenced the decisions that were made in writing or putting this book together. And for that, I've looked at the pomne, which are the introductory remarks of this book, which are also not just introduction and why the book was written, but also kind of explain how to read it, yeah, because it's actually a very complex handbook in a way. And I will like go through these points and then like always try to show you an example to point out what is actually happening here. And already in the first point of these introductory remarks, you see again, yeah, that Yi Chae was of the opinion that the family rites, so the Jali, was a good book. It was not too detailed, and it was also not too brief, but also it had some points that were not clear. So there was need to supplement it, to put some corrections in. And the other book he references is the aforementioned Sangnepyo, so the Essential Funerary Rites by Kim Chang-seng, who was involved in the production of this book, which he used not only for content, but also very much for the format of the book, which is, we will see very much oriented towards actual practical usage. And then he also says, okay, and also other older ritual texts are used for corrections. And then also we use explanations by other scholars, which include Korean scholars as well as Chinese scholars, in order to make kind of the perfect book on ritual, or a handbook on ritual for its time. And then also it was supposed to be in this very nice box that was included. This is, of course, from the digitalization that was made here at Stabi, which is very nice. And we also have a picture of this box included that is mentioned in the introductory remarks. So the second point is it kind of talks about the layout of the book, the basic layout of the book. So it is mentioned that the main text is written in bold characters, but if there are some additions made to the main text, then they're in finer print included in the text. So if we look here, this is the first ritual, so the ritual of capping, so the coming of age ritual, and you see here is the name of the ritual. Then we have here the first line of the original text that states a young man from 15 to 20 years of age may be capped. So often this age was Korean young men were often capped much earlier when they became engaged. And then it was thought that they already were ready to be adolescents. And then here in the next line, one level lower than the original text, you have the original commentary to the text. So here is particular a commentary by Sima Guang, who I said earlier, maybe if you remember, was a big influence on the writing of the Jali in the first place. So many of his commentaries were already included in the book itself. And then here you have a point where you see we're at the same level, but the character is a little bit lighter, so finer, in a finer part, and is here added, and this is now part of the funeral rituals. So after the family relative has deceased, there were certain steps to be taken to dress the body and make it ready, put a shroud over it, and place a soul seat. And one part that doesn't appear in the Jali, but which is here included because it appears in other ritual writings by Joshi, so it was thought to be important by Yi Chae, is that there was to be a torch lighted in the compound of the family. So, and he here includes where he has this idea from, then also includes a little commentary that is appended to the original source where he got it from. And then he also put a little comment on it here saying, okay, this is not included in the original text, but it has been done. We know that it has been done, and it appears in other ritual writings. So I'm including this point here that this torch should be lighted on the day a family member dies. So the next point then is actually going into the text and changing some parts around, or adding glosses for explanation, which are indicated with smaller characters that are introduced into the text in a single line. And here we have a part on where something is left out. If you compare the original text with the text of the Jali with the Sarye, you will see that here in this part, which is part of the engagement ceremonies. So when a younger relative of the family is taken to the girl's family, he's of course welcomed by her family. And then here a part is taken out about descent lines. So who would actually be the person who would welcome him and then kind of negotiate with him or accept the engagement offer. So this is left out here. I'm not completely sure why. The tea part is very interesting that the tea is left out. I will come back to this later at this point. And then also sometimes the text is switched around. Yeah, so we have these ritual like commentaries or statements that were supposed to be made. So the member of the bride's family would say then, yeah, we're very sorry our daughter is so stupid, and we're very thankful that you would marry her. And then a part that is actually comes in the Jali a little bit later is drawn forward. And it is said like, but if the engaged girl is the aunt or the elder sister of the person in charge of the bride's family, then he shouldn't say that she's stupid, because of course she is like an older person to him. So this was seen to be like an important augmentation here, to the point that it was put forward and put directly after the part instead of coming much later in the commentary to the original text. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, when there are more explanation added to the text, then it is again lower a little bit, and in fine print, and often the source of these new commentaries, or the source of these new commentaries, is also included for clarification of where it actually comes from. Here we see in this example, we see that he here includes, again, we're in the funeral part, and there is the original text calls for that the soul bed. So for the soul of the person to rest is placed next to the coffin, and then it says like how to organize this. And here we have a comment that is only here. You only see the comment. This is already the next part, and this is, you can see here Uam, which is Songseol, the aforementioned Songseol, which is an important member of the faction or the political faction that Yi Chae belonged to. So his ideas can be found here in this text, showing, of course, that Yi Chae was not only including texts, or was including texts from his particular line of scholarship. Now, the fourth point we have here are I think the most important part, or the most interesting part that we have and that we can find in the Sarye Palam, which are the ideas added actually by Yi Chae himself. We already saw one before where he explained why the torch part was added. And this is really interesting when he adds these messages, of course, because we can actually see into what he thought was important. So one big point that appears in the Juzejali, so in the family rites, is that you should not perform Buddhist rites for the deceased. Of course, this was one of the main ideas also behind the writing of the books in China already, that like Buddhist rituals, especially concerned to funeral rites, were so common and among the population that Confucian handbooks should be written in order to perform Confucian rites. And here, if you look into original text, there's a long, so you have this statement, do not perform Buddhist services, and then you have a long statement by Sima Guang saying that these Buddhist rites are bad and they shouldn't be performed, and people believe charlatans, and what they do is like all fake and has nothing to do with honoring the deceased and stuff like this. And this is all left out here, and then there's just a short comment added by Yi Chae, who says, yeah, we have these many comments, but here in Korea people don't do Buddhist rites basically anymore, which is not entirely true, I think, from what I know about the performance of funeral rites also during that time. But at least the belief was there that in the great scholar houses, so among the elites, there's no need to include this here anymore. Because Buddhist services were not performed anymore. Another question is the question of geomancy, so choosing like an auspicious place for the grave and the time to bury the person, which were also always often believed to be very important for their faring in the afterlife, and therefore the wealth of the family, the fortunes of the family. The Jali there has also an interesting comment, which says like, yeah, this is also rather bad, but because it's so important to many people and they believe in it, it can be done, but it should be done quickly. One problem that of course was associated with this, that often the corpse was left for a long time because they had to first figure out, okay, when was the best time to bury and where to bury first. And there were lots of struggling about good places on the mountainside, which was a good place and how to decide these places. So often it was just said, okay, to do it quickly. But it kind of left these points open for decision. And also in the Sarye Pirlam, there's no big comment on this matter. So this also is not really addressed. So in Korea, there was also these problems, and they were kind of, I guess, accepted in a way. Then we have this comment which appears in the ancestral worship, where in the Chinese original commentary you have a long part that how tea was involved in these rites for the deceased. And here, after a comment by Yulgok, we see again here the famous scholar Yulgok, but he talks more about when to perform these rites. There is a commentary again by Yi Chae, where he basically says, okay, in China they use tea, but it's not really our custom. So this is a good example of how these ritual books were trying to not only make the rituals adhere or be performed exactly to how it was done in China, but also accommodated for Korean practices. So here it says, okay, it's not really what we do. So I erased everything about the tea, and instead here's a part of like how hot water or alcohol is used instead in these parts. And then there's a lot points that basically talk about what you could maybe call a quality of reading or usage updates that are done to the original text. So it's mostly of how the original text is portrayed or how it is ordered. As you have seen before, maybe you remember that the Jali had several started with a discussion on general principle of ritual. This chapter was taken away from the beginning. The Sarye Pirlam starts immediately with the rites on capping, but puts all these general information directly to the rituals they concerned. So how to fashion the ritual clothing and stuff is put at the ritual where it is concerned. And also some sacrifices, which are here, the sacrifices for the first ancestors and early ancestors that already are marked in the Jalis, that Jushi didn't do them because they were only if you could actually prove that you were always in the successive lines of first son from the earliest ancestors, so really, really far back, which was basically impossible to prove. So these rituals were not supposed to be performed already during the time of Jushi, and they were also not included, but is at least mentioned here. So here you have, for example, the chapter or the volume, the last volume of the work on ancestral rites, and you maybe see that like here in the original Jali text it starts with the seasonal rites, while this chapter that is originally in the Jali at the beginning on the shrine hall is here included in the beginning of these ancestral of the ancestral worship part. So because it's related to that one, it is included here in the book. And then, which I think is one of the most interesting things, that the book lists exactly what you need to perform this ritual after each ritual is portrayed. So what implements do you need to do this? And you see this here. Yeah, you have to read again the commentary, the original commentary, and then you have here the needed utensils or implements related. Then here in brackets again, you have a little, okay, this is for this, the arranging of the instruments in ancestor worship, and then you have a list that starts here. Yeah, the incense burner, the incense stand, the incense box, the spoons, the tongs, what alcohol to use. It's a very long list. You see, okay, we need 5 of these, and we need 5 of these, and they're placed here, here, and there. So you could read about the meaning of the ritual, and then you can like read how to perform it, and then you had like a list of what is actually needed to perform the ritual. And then also included often after these ritual implements are the forms of announcing the ceremonies. So this is not only the way of announcing the ceremony to participants, but in this example, it is the capping ceremony. And you have here, again, what is used to perform this ritual. And it says like, oh, paper. Yeah, we need like paper for writing a letter. And then you have actually the form, which says like, okay, to Mr. XY, tomorrow my son will have like the capping, please come, see you there. So you basically just have to put in the name of the person, and it's the ritual form, which again, if you're familiar with the Yusupilzi, which is another book of the late Chosŏn dynasty, which is, you could translate what the Confucian scholar needs to know. It's like a very bureaucratic book which has like the forms on how to apply for somebody to be recognized by the state for their filial piety. So if somebody performed towards their parents, was very pious and like performed, showed great concern for the parents, the local magistrate could write to the government and says like, oh, this person is so, we should really honor them because they're so pious. And it's really a form. They just have to put in the name and everything and what they did. And you see that here. So it's very bureaucratic in that sense, and shows like a high, I think, level of systemization for these rituals. And then, which is always the eye catcher a little bit of these ritual, the handbook, are the diagrams that show here on how to place all these ritual implements that were talked about before. Where they put, so you see here actually the shrine hall, and here you see all the different, the reed we read before, the pitcher with the alcohol is out here, the incense is put here. So you see again how to organize everything. And this is also the diagrams originally all in the front of the jali, and with the Sarye pillar, they're always moved in front of the ritual that is concerned in this part. Or the ritual that is concerned with this one. And one I thought was one of the most interesting one are these demon quellers that is still part of the ritual. There was some discussion even already in the Chinese text if this is actually has to be included. That in front of the funeral procession you have these demon quellers that are there to scare away bad spirits from the procession, and of course from the deceased person, which march in front of it. And this is also used in Korea, and you see like here how they were supposed to look, what is their outfits, and they have these for higher scholars or people that are higher up for higher officials, you have actually these masks that were worn with 4 eyes, that look like this, to scare away the demons. And then we have the last 2 points are on organization of the book as well. This is sadly missing. It was already in the publication of the book, where there's diagrams included that are, or were supposed to be included, that organize kind of, I assume what is meant here is a diagram that is included to organize all the different rituals and their importance maybe. And then the 10th point, and the last point, which also sounds very interesting, is that it seems to me the idea was to include also a kind of an index at the end, where you could like easily jump to what you were searching for, or collate informations about the different rituals, which is not included in the book, but was apparently supposed to be following these introductory remarks. And one last thing I find pretty interesting is in the epilogue of the book, or the postscript. So the book is dated, which is pretty standard for many Korean books of the Chosŏn dynasty, that were not circulated, or at least were not supposed to come into hands of Chinese officials. But maybe at this point it was not so important anymore. But it is dated by the date of the last Ming emperor. So they used the dating of the last Ming emperor and said like, okay, it's the first Kaptin year, which is 6064. And then plus 180 years, and that is the time when the book was published, which of course kind of shows the adherence of the Chosŏn elites still to the Ming dynasty, and their rejection of the Manchu Qing as a Bavarian dynasty. Yeah. And then as a last point, today, of course, less and less people in Korea perform ancestor rites because it's very hard, as you see, if you have to have these extensive handbooks and everything about it. Often also, because it's a lot of work, especially for the women who have to prepare all this food, and these days, you have these services, so customer-based economy, I guess, where you can just order the utensils and all the food stuff that you need for the ritual. And actually, this particular page, if you go on it, it actually references the Sarye and says, these rites are defined by the Sarye. I didn't get around to ask them if these particular setups they have here are actually confirmed. From what I can tell from the picture and what I saw, it is not the same, but they still reference the Sarye as a ritual guide, which I guess shows that it was a really important book. Yeah, so we can also tell a little bit from the numbers in which it was published. I didn't find any total numbers how often it was published, but you can already see if you look through Korean libraries that this book must have, especially in this version, as it is also here in the Stabi, must have been published quite often, because nearly every library in Korea holds one. And even if you go to an antiquariat in Seoul, you easily can find this book for sale. So it must have been a very common book, because of course it was considered to be of great importance and in its use, and was supposed to be used by nearly everybody. Okay, I hope I didn't talk too long. That would be the end. Thank you.